welcome and thank you for spending part of your Friday afternoon with me. Today we're going to be talking about Microsoft Excel pivot tables. I do have the Q&A open and the chat open on a separate monitor here. So if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to post them and we will definitely get to your questions. So our objectives for today are to understand data organization and sources that are appropriate for use with pivot tables, that you will be able to use basic pivot table techniques for data exploration, and pivot table techniques for data presentations. So when you're looking at a pivot table, and if you haven't used one before, you're really going to be amazed by what it can do for you. Because as my slide says, it summarizes, it sorts, it reorganizes, it groups, it counts, it totals, it averages all of your data for you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I used to do prior to learning the power of a pivot table, and then I'll show you that Excel really does all of that work for you. Because the advantages of a pivot table is that it's interactive, it's dynamic, it's user-friendly, it updates. You can transfer this information into PowerPoint for a presentation, and I'll show you that as well. So let's go ahead. I have a couple of examples that I'm going to share with you today. Here is my first example, and what I have are some salespeople, their regions, their order amounts, and this is mock for Q1. So we've got months January, February, and March in there. So I have all of my salespeople. I have them listed in alphabetical order currently. And in the past, what I would do if I wanted to perhaps add up, let's say, what Kathy's Q1 sales were, I would just come over to 6 and I would, insert maybe a couple of cells, and then I would build my sum function and do that for each one of the salespeople, which was somewhat time consuming, but I was not aware of the power of a pivot table. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to undo that. And let's talk about pivot tables. So underneath the insert ribbon and the group tables, you have the ability to insert a pivot table or to have Excel recommend a pivot table style for you. Either way works just fine, and we'll show you both. The one thing that you do want to keep in mind is that before you go to insert a pivot table, you must have a cell selected from within your table. So my table runs from A1 down to B39, and I can select all of that data, or I can simply click inside of the table and it will know to grab all of that data. Now, if you want to, you can select all of that, just a little keyboard shortcut, rather than clicking and holding my mouse down in A1 and then dragging down and over. If you hit Control Star, that will select your entire table. You can also do a Control A, that will select the entire table as well. The Control A might be a keyboard shortcut that you're a little more familiar with. So once I have that data selected, I'm going to move from my home ribbon over to the insert ribbon. And when I do so, I'm just going to go ahead and click on Pivot Table. Now on the pivot table, it tells me to select a range, and like I said, it runs from A1 down to D39. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, because that is the information excuse me, that I want to work with. And when I do so, you can see that it automatically adds a sheet to my Excel workbook. Now, I don't have anything yet because I haven't selected any of the fields. And you'll note that if I go back to my pivot table data, that I have 4 different fields. I have salesperson, region, order amount, and month. When I go back to sheet 5, my pivot table fields are there. So Excel acknowledges this information. And if I were to go back, which we will here in just a little bit, to my pivot table data, and perhaps add a percentage. It will then on my sheet that I inserted the pivot table, it will include that field. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to select salesperson, and I'm going to select order amount. Now, when I do that, you can note that down below our fields, we have 4 different boxes. So we can put these fields in any one of these boxes. Those boxes are filter, columns, rows, and values. Excel is intuitive. So when I selected salesperson, it automatically put it in rows. If I want to, I can drag and drop that. Maybe I'm the type of person that prefers to look at it in a column. So I can drag and drop that information to any one of these squares that I'd like to. I prefer it to be in the rows. So what I have here now, rather than, remember when I started, I said that I was, for each one of my salespeople, I was inserting a row and then inserting a sum function. Well, voila. The pivot table automatically does that for me. So it tells me that because I have my 2 fields selected, that Kathy sold 3625, that Michael sold 3700, and so on. And my total, my grand total for Q1 is $24,285. Now, if I want to change these around, maybe I want to add in the region and the month, you can select as many or as few fields as you would like. So it just kind of depends on what information you're trying to extract from the table on the other worksheet. So the one thing that you'll note is that if I click outside of this from A3 down to B12, if I click maybe over here in H6, the information to manipulate my pivot table disappears because I don't have that selected, so I don't need it. The other thing that you'll note when I do have my pivot table data selected, we have 2 more ribbons up here. I have Pivot Table Analyze and I have Design. And we're going to be looking at those as well. But again, if I click outside of that data, they disappear. So if you're used to using Microsoft Word or Microsoft PowerPoint, Excel, you understand that there are other ribbons, but unless they're in use, Microsoft Excel or Microsoft in general does not show those particular fields. All right, so let me go back over to Pivot Table Data, and I'm just going to make a drastic change here. So I'm going to say rather than 1900, I'm going to say that Kathy sold 19,000. So when I hit the Enter key, it automatically updates in my pivot table table. But when I go back over to my other sheet, or sheet 5, you see that it didn't update. And if you're used to using charts, you know that charts automatically update. If you update any information, it automatically updates. The pivot table works just a little bit different. So if I go up to Pivot Table Analyze and select that ribbon, I have to go underneath the data group and tell it to refresh. So if I click on refresh, or the keyboard shortcut is Alt F5, if I click on refresh, it automatically updates it. That's one thing that you have to manually do in a pivot table. So like I said, you can, maybe I don't care about the salespeople, maybe I want to look at the regions. So it gives me the amount for each one of these regions, and you can toggle back and forth. This is nice for a live presentation because if you have somebody asking you specific questions, you can manipulate the data instantly, and it will regard your clicks of the mouse. So the other thing that I wanted to share with you is that let's say that you want to compare just 2 of the salespeople. So on rows, I have a filter. And if I click on the down arrow, you know, I can sort them from A to Z or Z to A, but I can also filter them out. So right now it's showing all of my salespeople. If I click in the box where it says select all, it will deselect all of my salespeople. Let's say, for instance, I want to focus on Kathy and Richard. So I'm just going to select those two folks. When I click on OK, it just gives me their data. And when I'm ready to go back, I simply go back to the filter. I can click and select all, click on OK. It brings everybody back. So when I'm using that filter, it's not deleting any of the data. It's simply eliminating some of those salespeople so I can focus just on the data of Melissa and Shannon. So that's one additional feature of a pivot table that you can look at. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention was that the pivot table defaults to sum of the order amount. If I come down to values and click on the down arrow, it's going to give me several different options. And the option that I want to focus on is value field setting. If I click on that, I can tell the pivot table that I don't want the sum, that I want a count. So in other words, it will tell me how many sales each one of my people had in Q1. So if I go ahead and click on OK, you can see that Kathy had 4 sales, Michael had 5, and so on. So let's go back over to pivot table data, and I'll just go down to the bottom. And let's say that Chris had 1 more sale. So I'm going to go ahead and just add another sale for Chris, and we don't want that to say April. So we're just going to go ahead and tell it to copy that cell. Now, when I go back over to my sheet 5 and to Chris, remember, it doesn't update automatically. I have to go back to the pivot table analyze and click on refresh. And when I let up on my mouse, it will change, the number will change from 7 to 8 or from 6 to 7. Let's go back over, make sure that's right. Chris, go ahead and select. Oh, I know what it is. I need to add to those. So what's happening is because I added to the bottom, it's not within those cells. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And let's just go up here. Let me do this another way. We'll insert and we'll sell Richard. Okay, now when I go back over to sheet 5 and to Richard, if I click on refresh, it will change from 3 to 4. So again, you can go to values and you can select any value that you want. So if you want the average, if you want the maximum number that they sold, you want the minimum that they sold, and so on, you can select any one of these. Now, one question that I get quite frequently is, can you change that to a percentage? And as you can see, the value field setting amount, there is not a percentage in there. So I would have to go back over to my table and add another column. So if I want to add those percentages in, I can simply put in my percentages. We'll just use our format painter so that it looks the same. And then I'm going to have to do a couple of different things here. From order amount, I'm just going to go ahead and insert an auto sum. It will give me the sum of the sales for Q1. And then I'm going to do a simple division. So I'll type in equal, and we want C2 divided by C41. And when I hit the enter key, C2 divided by, there we go. Okay, now I need to change my formatting because I want this to be a percentage rather than in currency. So I'm just going to come up here underneath the number group, click on percentage, and you can see that Kathy, with her sale of 19,000, has 46% of the Q1 sales. Now I want to fill this down, but I need to make C41 an absolute reference. If you're not familiar with that term, please join me for the advanced Excel class, and we will certainly cover absolute reference. And now I'm just going to go ahead and fill that down. And you can see that it gives me my percentages. When I come back over and let me go ahead, let's just start this over. We'll go ahead and delete this sheet. When I go back over to my pivot table data, we'll just select all of this, go back to insert and to pivot table. It grabs all of that data. And now when I click on OK, you can see that the field percentage is included. So I can select salesperson and percentage. Now, the one thing that you need to do is you need to go in and manually change this from a decimal to a percentage. It doesn't carry over from one sheet to the other. The format does not. So that's one a little bit of a downfall, but we can work around that, right? So if you want to see the order amount and the percentage, you can very easily do that. We'll just change these to currency and percentage. So you can select any one of those that you would like. Okay, so let's go in. The next thing that I'd like to do is I want to go ahead and I want to chart this information. So I'm going to come up to Pivot Table Analyze, and I'm going to go underneath the Tools group and click on Pivot Chart. So when you click on Pivot Chart, just like inserting a chart, it will give you all kinds of options. You know, which type of chart would you like to insert? I think the clustered chart or the clustered column does a nice job, but you can select from any one of these that you want to. And if you're like me, you'll play around with this forever because you want it to look just perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on OK. And you'll note that very similar to you inserting a chart with data in Excel, the pivot chart also has a format ribbon that appears. I'm going to go ahead and pop back over here to design because I want this chart to have its own worksheet. So underneath design, I'm going to come over and I'm going to tell it that I want to move the chart, and we're going to move the chart to a new sheet. You can leave it as chart 4, you can rename it, it's up to you. When I click on OK, it's going to go ahead and add a third chart or a third worksheet to my workbook. So we'll click on OK, and here is my chart. Now, once again, if I want to, I can, like I was talking about live presentations, I can filter people out, and it will acknowledge that in the chart. So if you're doing a live presentation and maybe your CEO says, okay, I would just want to talk about William and Richard right now. So you can very easily go in and just select their two names. It will display their data and you can discuss that. If you want to, you can move from salespeople to region. It will also acknowledge that in the chart. So any changes that you make, it's going to make those changes to the chart as well. So you have filters on all of these, and you can add or delete any information that you would like. Now, the next thing that I wanted to look at is I have a blank PowerPoint presentation that I have already brought up, and I'm just going to split my screen here so we can see both at the same time. Whoops, let's see that instead. So if I want to create a PowerPoint presentation, I can do so by selecting my chart and simply copying it. And you can do that by either doing Control-C, which is your keyboard shortcut, or you can go to the clipboard on your home ribbon, click on Copy, and then we'll come over to PowerPoint and paste that in. And you can see that in my PowerPoint presentation, I now have this chart. Now remember that PowerPoint and Excel are going to talk to one another. So if I make changes in Excel or on my pivot table, it's also going to acknowledge that in PowerPoint. So you can see I'm making changes in Excel, and it's making the same changes in PowerPoint. So I can add by regions. I can take the filter off. Maybe I want to see everybody instead of just these two. When I click on OK, it will update Excel and it will update PowerPoint. So now let's say, for instance, you have a lot of data that you want to present, but you don't want, every time you make a change in your Excel pivot table, you don't want that change to be made in PowerPoint. So in other words, you don't want these two to be connected. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this chart from PowerPoint, and I'm going to come back over to my chart. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-C to copy that. Then I'm going to come back over to PowerPoint and hang on, I don't want to paste that quite yet. So if I come up to paste, you've got several different options. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste a picture. So I'm not pasting a live chart. I'm just pasting a picture of it. Therefore, if I come back over, don't need any design ideas right now. If I come back over to Excel, and let's say I was focusing on salesperson and order amount. Now I want to focus on region and order amount. It does not impact your PowerPoint presentation. So if I want to add in another chart to my PowerPoint presentation, let's say I want region and order amount in there, I can come over, I can copy that, go back over to PowerPoint, and when I paste, I'm just going to paste a picture. So you can have these, you could have Excel and PowerPoint communicating with one another, or you can paste them in as a picture so that you can create a presentation. So pretty simple and a lot of fun with using, combining Excel and PowerPoint. I'll go ahead and make my screen live again. Okay, so that's just one real quick example of creating a pivot table. Another question that I get quite frequently is, I'm not really sure how to organize my data. So I have another Excel workbook that I'm going to share with you. And this was actually a document that someone sent to me. It's a documentation from a community college in Michigan, and a friend of mine sent it to me, and she said, okay, I'm spending all of this time creating, manually, she's using Excel, but she was manually adding up these numbers and not utilizing Excel and the power of it. So as you can see, she has values in here, but there's no formulas. And I can tell that because I can select the cell with a number in it and come up to my formula bar, and you can see that it just has the value 60, but now not how she derived at that information. Same thing with the percentages. She manually calculated that for a report that she was giving to her manager. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop over to maybe the Steve worksheet and talk a little bit about cleaning this up. Now this report came from a database, so she received it this way, but then you can see, just like I was doing in the past, she went in and she inserted rows and she did a sum for the number of classes that were taught. So what we're looking at here, and if you're going, I have no idea what this means, Julie, bear with me, because we're going to clean it up, and I want to talk a little bit about how we're going to clean it up here in just a minute. So as you're looking across, you do have your different fields. One big no-no in Excel is that you don't want to combine labels and values. So you can see that several of these, she has done that. But we really don't need those particular columns. So we're going to eliminate the columns that we do not need. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select column A. So we definitely don't need that. I'm going to move back to my home ribbon and delete that one. We don't need most of these columns, to be honest with you. We do need the course, and we're going to talk a little bit about what the course information means here in just a few minutes. But we don't need column B, C, D, E, F, or G. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight those. What we do need is column H. So let's just get rid of some of this stuff. We need column H. So I'm just going to go ahead and select over through K, and we're going to eliminate the data that we don't need first. Now the next thing that we need to eliminate, let me go ahead and make this a little bit bigger so it's easier for you to see. There we go. So we have our course and we have the actual number of courses that ran. But what I need to eliminate are these rows in between. And there's a couple of ways that I can handle that. I can go through and I can delete them. However, there's a lot of data here and that would take quite a bit of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of a shortcut. I'm going to select column A. And then I'm going to come over to sort and filter underneath the editing group. And I'm going to tell it to sort from A to Z. And what's going to happen when I tell it to sort from A to Z are those spaces, like in rows 23 and 24, they're all going to move to the bottom. So I can very easily delete them all at once. So I'm going to go ahead and click on sort A to Z. It says, do you want to expand your selection? Yes, we definitely want to expand our selection. So I'm going to go ahead and click on sort. And then I'll just come down to the bottom. And now we can very easily just eliminate those cells. Oops, there's a few more we need to delete. Okay, so now we have the two columns that we want to work with. Looks a lot cleaner. We can actually see what's going on. But what I need to do, underneath the field course, this is actually a term and a call number for the course itself. And I need to separate those two out. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select column B. I'm going to come up underneath the cells. I'm going to insert another column. So it's just going to put a column in between A and C. Because when I separate this out, I'm going to need a column for the additional data to move into. Now, you might be saying, even you have to sit there and type all of that out? Absolutely not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to select column A. I'm going to move from the home ribbon over here to my data ribbon. And on the data ribbon, there's underneath the data tools group, there's something called text to columns. And this is also another wonderful tool that I didn't know about or Excel had not incorporated it into its software. Because I can tell you numerous times, years and years ago, that if I wanted two cells to be separated, for instance, maybe a first name and a last name, I did that manually. You don't need to do that. With text to columns, what it allows you to do is to either move information into two different columns in delimited or in fixed width. So delimited is something like a comma, a tab, a space, items like that. With fixed width, when I select that, I'm going to go ahead and click on next. And now it says, okay, where do you want this to split? So I'm going to come down underneath my data preview, and I'm going to click right in between the P and the A. And you can see that it puts a line in there with an arrow. And it says, okay, this is where we're going to split the information. I'm going to go ahead and click on next. And again, it assures you that that's what you want to do. If you make the mistake, Control Z is a great friend to undo. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on finish. And it separated these two columns out. So I need to do a little bit of work here. So this is actually the course title, or call, I should say. And this is the term. So now I have 3 columns. I have the term that the course was taught in, I have the course call number, and I have the actual number of courses that ran during that term. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select A1, so I need to be inside of my table again, very important to remember that. Go ahead and select all of that data. I'm going to go back to the insert ribbon, and you can click on either pivot table or recommended pivot table. I can go ahead and select that, and you can see that it gives me a couple of different options. Excel is very intuitive, so you can do this either way. We'll go ahead and just select some of actual term and click on OK. It gives me my additional sheet 1. So now I added another worksheet to my workbook. Just because I selected underneath insert, just because I selected recommended pivot table does not mean that I can't add or delete or manipulate this information. Excel is simply saying that this is what the program thinks is what you probably need. Again, let me go ahead and increase this a little bit so it's easier for you to see. But still, I can drag and drop my term to the columns if I want to, or I can bring it back down and so on. So regardless of whether you use pivot table or recommended pivot tables, it will allow you to manipulate that information. So now you can see that I have my totals here. It's telling me, we want to go ahead and put the call number in there too, I think. And it's telling me that each one of these courses, how many sections ran, and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back over to Pivot Table Analyze. And we're just going to put in a pivot table chart. Now that's an awful lot of data for one person to absorb, and it's hard to see that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select a certain amount of data that I want to chart. So I'm going to go with term 18AP. I'm just going to select from A5 down to C26. Go back up to Pivot Table Analyze. And we're going to go ahead and underneath Tools, we're going to click on Pivot Chart. Note that it has recommended pivot charts too. You can click on that, but we already have that, so we'll go ahead and Pivot Chart. Oops, what's it doing here? It's grabbing all that data. Let me go ahead and click on Cancel here. So rather than selecting the data, I'm going to make that change over in my pivot table fields, and we'll go ahead and go back to Pivot Table Analyze and Pivot Chart, and there we have a much cleaner looking chart that's easy to look at and view. So we'll go ahead and click on OK. It gives me my chart. I can go ahead and go back to Design, back to Move Chart, to New Sheet, and click on OK, and it gives me a new sheet. So here's my chart. And again, I can change this if I want to. You've got different, if you want the call numbers in there, if you want just the terms in there, if you just want the actuals in there. Perhaps you don't want the some of the actuals. Again, you can come down underneath values, click on the down arrow, go to value field settings, and I can change this maybe just to count, or select any value that you want. So it defaults to some, but you can change it to any one of these values that you would like to utilize. So go ahead and click on OK. Here's my chart. Again, if you want to, you can copy and paste it into Microsoft PowerPoint and utilize it that way. Let me go ahead and go back to my sheet 1. So here you have your summary. Here's my summary with the pivot chart, and here's the summary that my friend had created. So you can decide for yourself which one was easier and which one looks a little bit better and it's easier to read. Again, I can filter these out. So if I want to focus just on a couple of terms, I can select 2 different terms, click on OK, and it gives me just those 2 terms. My chart will update to adjust to that, and we can go back to filter. Okay, I don't see any questions coming up yet. We'll go ahead, and if you do have questions, I'm keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A. So if you have anything, certainly let me know. Just a couple of things that I want to review is that you can drag and drop the information. So if I select term, if I click and hold down on my mouse, I can drag and drop that down to rows, or I can move it up to columns. But if I just select it, Excel is going to, the pivot table is going to do that work for me. However, if you want to move it, you certainly can. So it's just one nice drag and drop, and all of your information is summarized for you. If I go back to Steve, which is what I use this for, let's say that my actual for the call ANIM 051 is actually 67. If I hit the enter key, go back to sheet 1, remember that I have to go to pivot table analyze and click on refresh, and it will now update that information. So that's very important that you remember to click on refresh, or the keyboard shortcut is Alt F5. Either one will work the same. If you want to manipulate your chart, you do have the design ribbon, just like you do when you insert a chart into Excel. So you can change the chart, you can change the format if you'd like to. You can change the layout. You can make any of those changes that you would like with the design ribbon and the format ribbon. Okay, let's see. What else do we want to talk about here? Any questions? I'm just going to pause for a second and see if you have any questions. Okay, I don't see anything coming up, so let's go ahead and just do a quick review of moving this information from Excel to PowerPoint. So I'm going to go ahead and split my screen again. I must have closed that, so we'll just open up the PowerPoint and we'll get a new blank presentation. And I actually don't need that. There we go. Okay, so side by side, I just have PowerPoint and Excel up. I'll go ahead and delete this because we don't need to put any text in. If I want to, Linda, how did you split your screen? Good question. I have 2 monitors that I'm working with here. My first monitor, you are only seeing that through Zoom. But what I did, let me go ahead and just bring this back up. This is called snapping the window. So if I snap the window, I'm just going to click up here and grab the file and move it around. If I go all the way over to the side, you can see there's a little frame about halfway through my screen. When I let up on my mouse, it splits it right in half, and then it shows me everything else that I have open, and I can select the other software package that I want to share that screen with. So I'm just going to do PowerPoint, or yeah, PowerPoint. So now if you want to, since we're talking about splitting screens a little bit, if you go up into the corner, so I'm taking my mouse, I'm just dragging and dropping up into the corner, this will allow me to bring up 4 different applications at the same time. So you can have up 4 or you can have up 2, whatever is most convenient for you. Typically, I don't split my screen into fours, but quite frequently I do utilize two different screens on, or split those screens up. So thank you for the question. Okay, so let's go back over. I'm going to go ahead and select this chart. We're going to copy that. You can copy it. So there's a couple of different ways that you can handle this. You can go ahead and just copy this as a picture and tell it that you want it to be in the picture format, either picture or bitmap, and go ahead and click on OK. And then when I get over to PowerPoint, I can simply paste, and it pastes in as a picture. So I can tell it to copy as a picture or to paste as a picture, either one. And when I manipulate my information, remember that because I copied it as a picture, when I update my Excel workbook, it does not update in PowerPoint. So just a little review on that. If you want it to update, obviously you can do that. We'll go ahead and just delete this, and you can just do a simple copy and paste. And when I make my adjustments in Excel, it's automatically going to update my PowerPoint presentation as well. Either way, whichever is easiest for you. All right, any other questions, folks? I think I went through that kind of fast, so let me know if you do have any questions. Can you relabel the table for PowerPoint? Yes, what you can do, good question. What you can do, let me go ahead and go back over to PowerPoint. Note that, let me enlarge this, that when, oh, I brought this in as a picture. I don't want to do that. Hang on, is this one live? Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and grab my chart. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, and I'll move back to PowerPoint, and we'll paste that in. When I do so, not only does design ideas come up, but just like what you would see in Excel, you now have chart design and format design. So you can manipulate this in PowerPoint the same way that you would in Excel. As a matter of fact, if you're copying and pasting charts, not as a picture, but as a live document, so that when you manipulate the data in Excel, it updates in PowerPoint. I would recommend that you changed your format design in PowerPoint, not in Excel. Because many times, for me anyway, it changes the format when you copy and paste it into PowerPoint, so you end up doing that twice. So the answer is yes, I can change that in PowerPoint. We'll just change this to my pivot table. Good question, thank you. All right, other questions, folks. We've got a little bit of time left, so if you do have other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. What is the change data source? Linda, I'm not sure what. Let me see. So Linda, where are you seeing where does it function? There's a change data source button on the last ribbon you were on. Okay, let me try to replicate that for you. Okay, so the answer to that is, remember back, let me pull up this other one. Oh, I might have closed it. So what it does is, if I were to go back over to my Steve tab and I were to add something to this, let's just say that we copy this down. Row 244 is not in my information. So if I wanted to include that, if I added more rows, I would go back to Pivot Table Analyze and back to change the data source so that it included row 244. So I can just change that to 244 and it will include that. So that's what that means by change data source. So if you increase or decrease your columns or your rows, you can automatically change it from the data group and change data source, as opposed to just reinventing the wheel and inserting another pivot table. So what are the most used options? To be honest with you, the most used options that I go through, so underneath the pivot table name, you can rename the pivot table if you want to. I typically use pivot table data and tools to insert my charts. Underneath design, that's a ribbon that you're probably very familiar with because you see it with all of the charts. I don't use active fields very often. It just kind of depends on the type of data that I'm working with. But typically, pivot table, data, and tools are the three groups that I use most frequently. Any other questions? All right, folks, I did share with you my email address in the chat, so hopefully you saw that. It's, yep, right here. Let me go ahead and just pop it back up again. If you do have questions that come up, feel free to email me. I'm always willing to help people. I like troubleshooting, so if I don't know the answer, I will figure it out, or I will find a person that does know it. Thank you for joining me. Have a great day. And I'll look forward to seeing you in another webinar soon. Thanks to the DoSpace and Debris for everything that you do. Take care and have a nice weekend, folks.